Hey everybody, Aaron Bishop here with the Bishop's Blurb. Temptation is a frightful thing. It can often be hard to recognize temptations when they arise. But if we compare the stories of Jesus and of Israel in the wilderness, there is a pattern to temptation that we can find that develops through a comparison of these stories. So let's look at Israel first. The story of Israel in the wilderness and the temptations that they face begin in Numbers chapter 10, when Israel begins the journey on their way to Canaan from Mount Sinai. As the journey proceeds, they are faced with three temptations in chapters 11 through 14. The first is when the people cry to God for a variety of foods. They're tired of the manna, and so they reflect on the food that they had while in Egypt. In chapter 12, Miriam and Aaron then slander Moses because of his status and because of who he married. In the course of the chapter, in verse 2, they actually elevate themselves to the same status as Moses. The third then is when Israel refuses to enter the land of Canaan because the enemy that's there is stronger and is more powerful than they are, from chapters 13 to 14. Now, if we take those three situations and we compare them to the temptation of Jesus in the wilderness from the book of Luke, we find the same base motives behind all three temptations. The first one, Satan comes to Jesus and says, "Take the stone and make it into bread." Immediately we think of Numbers chapter 11. They were tired of their base food of manna. They wanted more. They wanted something. They had a desire to satisfy their appetites. And Jesus is being tempted to do the same thing when he's going without. He's being tempted with just simple bread. And so this correlation between these two is real simple. In the second temptation, Satan then offers Jesus the kingdoms of the world, and he promises to give them to him. How does this relate to the story of Aaron and Miriam in Numbers 12? Well, let's read verse 2. And they said, "Has the Lord indeed spoken only through Moses? Has he not spoken through us also?" And the Lord heard it. In both situations, someone is tempted to elevate themselves to a position that has not yet been granted to them. Rise above your station. You can be rich and powerful and famous. They're not better than you. You can be equal to Moses. You can be king over all the kingdoms of the earth. This temptation can be boiled down to an elevation of pride. The third temptation, throw yourself from the temple and God will save you from destruction. In Numbers 13 through 14, go into the land and defeat the enemies that are greater than you are. Now this one might seem a little more disconnected because there's two sides to the same coin. For Israel, God is commanding them to dive into certain death, and God is promising that he will save them. For Jesus, however, he is being tempted to dive into certain death and that God will save him. And the difference is in who is doing the commanding. In this we find that correlation. There's this promise of power over death. In one, God promises, "I will take care of you, death cannot touch you." And in the other one, Satan promises, "Be reckless and God will not allow you to see death." This is the temptation of power. When we see these stories in parallel, then they create for us a template of temptation that we can then use to help spot temptation in our own lives when it arises. Desires, lusts, the things of the flesh. Pride, power, puffing up and becoming greater than others. Or power, seeking to rule over others or seeking to enter into situations you haven't been commanded to and assuming you are going to be okay. These seem to be the primary motives that the enemy uses when he tempts us.